I'll do a quick introduction of myself. Tom Abel Green, also known as Tag, really long surname. I also have a new job title, although my job still is what I was doing, a bit more related to kind of what we're seeing today, and work across the academia group. And Matt, you are?
Senior lecturer at University of South Wales, training future teachers, and also Apple Professional Learning Specialist. So no new title for me, just
no new title, but I have omitted actually that you're also a badge collector. We've joked about it before. Not only are you an Apple Professional Learning Specialist, you're also certified for Microsoft and for Google. So I think that's really important to acknowledge that as well at the beginning of the session, just because whilst you're hugely passionate about what you do with iPad, you actually do use those other products, right? So absolutely in the know. And I think from our perspective today is absolutely not to be here and to say that Google or Microsoft, the ecosystems are not worthy or anything else. Actually, they're fantastic. And they absolutely complement the use of iPad. I think what we've probably seen in COVID specifically is that the need to move to a more cloud solution has been imperative for some of the successes, right? And what we have seen is that people have been scared to maybe consider certain types of devices based on the fact they're using maybe Microsoft Office 365 or they're using G Suite. And what we're saying is that it mixes really well. So we're going to do a bit of a run through today, and we're then going to do a bit of a live demo. So you'll be totally in charge of that. So if it goes well, we'll give you a big round of applause. If it doesn't go well, it's still your fault, Matt, and we'll just watch from here. So I guess from our perspective, we want to talk about some of the myths, and we say about myths, it's really what we often, you and I, talking to leadership teams about is, we're a Microsoft school, we can't then use devices like iPads. And so some of these are a little bit, tongue in cheek, a little bit, this is kind of what we hear. And actually, it's just about going through some of these. If there are questions, we would love for the audience to ask those, and we'll answer them as we go. You may have something in the live demo. What I would say is we're not, it's not going to be a full training session. That is kind of a next step that we'd like to consider with you guys. So Matt, anything else you'd like to add before we start on that?
No, I think you've covered most of it. I think, like you said, most of the conversations come out of those leadership conversations about, and certainly in the last few months, it's been that post-COVID response to what are we going to do to make sure that we can support students from a distance. And then that's led to learning and teaching discussions about how do we build on this. And I think that's when this kind of conversation comes up with, we've found a solution, and be that Office 365 or Google Suite, whatever it might be. And now we kind of need to know that the students have got a device that they can access those things. And that's when I suppose lots of these kind of myths or questions or concerns come up, because they've found something that works well, but they need to scale it. And actually, when you scale it, you're looking at those new opportunities to transform what learning and teaching can look like. And I think that's when the device becomes the discussion point about, well, what is it we're trying to achieve as an outcome for our learning? And then can the two interact? And exactly as you said, there's lots of ways that the device and the system complement each other. And we kind of just wanted to use this session to talk through that and answer people's questions. If anyone had any questions about, this is something we're looking to do, is that possible? That's the purpose of the day.
And I think you said it at the beginning there, just that, that people have concerns, and actually they're legitimate concerns. For me, when I get asked what is that key element of a mobile technology solution as part of a teaching and learning journey, for me, the ecosystem is always key. And actually, I won't mention the people that are on this call, but there are a couple who, what do we do next? We're doing great stuff with iPad, but the workflow needs a bit of a jump. And actually, migrating to Office 365 in that instance has been hugely powerful. And it is a new way of doing things. But ultimately, if it can add value, that's really important from that perspective as well. And actually, we can say it very openly. Apple, do talk about the use of Office 365 and Google Apps on iPad as an absolute winning kind of combination. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about a bit of the Apple equivalents, if you like. And I think these are some of the common myths that we see, and we'll go through them. But PowerPoint has been a stable tool for presentations and for teaching. And I think 10, 15 years ago, interactive whiteboards were kind of a big drive, and also how do you use them? Well, a lot of that is not just interactiveness of using a pen, for example, but it's also about showing slides and so on, and that kind of goes on to I need a big screen, I need a small screen, and how do we make that work? But also I think some of the concerns certainly from leadership teams is because we're a Microsoft school, we have to use Microsoft devices, or we have to do everything in Microsoft and everything else. And I think what we're trying to show is that it actually works in balance. iPad isn't a computer. It's a funny old joke, that one, isn't it? Because what is a computer? And I think you've done your masters, haven't you, fully on iPad?
I did,
using
yeah.
Office 365.
Yeah. And funny enough, that's going to be in the demo today, just so someone else reads my dissertation.
No hijacking. A really valid point is that we know that Office 365 is used massively in the workplace, and the reality is students are going to be leaving their education at some point, at some level, and they're going to be going into a workplace where they're having to use Microsoft tools. I think from a modern workplace viewpoint is a lot of businesses even now are moving to Office 365, so the cloud version of Microsoft, so it's not on-prem anymore. And you're right, I think the generations of today, everyone in university and below, is living in the world of internet. They've always been in the world of internet, and we've got a big chart that I haven't got today, but we live in that world of instant gratification and access and so on. So that all kind of fits into that. And you're right, is students need to know how to use a word-based document, I would say, but accessing the content is important. So again, that goes back to that cloud piece. Another big one, touch typing or typing skills. And I think you and I, obviously, huge iPad Pro users, and we both have, the Magic Keyboard cases and with the trackpad built in now. And so that move, the barriers, some of those barriers have gone away because you've got the ability to use those tools. And I know you'll demo those a bit later on, so we won't dive into that too much. And then the classic, that unencrypted or maybe encrypted USB stick. Again, a myth. Laptops absolutely you can plug those into, but actually with iPad and the very strong Files app that sits on iPad that allows you to not only read USB sticks but read your OneDrive if you've got that activated, is really powerful as well. So again, these are generic. These aren't the every single concern or myth or anything else that we have, but these are some of the I guess the more frequent ones that we see. So with that, I think it's fair to say that actually Microsoft make more apps for iPad than Apple make themselves for iPad, which is interesting. And they have lots of support pages available, and you'll see as we go through the deck, there are kind of links to various things. Academia is a multi-platform business. We're a huge Apple partner, but as a business we use the Office 365 backbone, and so everything that I use on my devices is Office 365 based, as well as the other apps that I have access to. At the university, you are 365?
We are, yeah. We have always been for staff, Office 365. Students were Google Suite for a period of time. They've now moved over to Office 365 in the cloud as well. And we're also iPad one-to-one from September.
Yeah.
So we've looked at all of those implications of the and we'll talk about this, I suppose, as we go through the productivity of the admin element of the job. Obviously, our admin sits on Office 365. That's where all of those infrastructure things work from, including email.
Yeah.
But then from a student point of view, that's learning and teaching. So then there's a slightly different aspect to that. And yes, they need to connect with us through certain things like Outlook and other elements of the connectivity. But then when it comes down to them doing their work and being creative, actually what we say is you have choice. As long as it can get to us through various means, that's absolutely fine.
I think the reality is also is that what we've got to be mindful of is that whilst the apps are available, there is a workflow that it is slightly different in the way that you're working always in the cloud, and whilst and so it's just that mindset change also needs to be part of that journey as well as using the apps. And I think we have to be transparent about that. Teams works fantastically well. I do a lot of presentations to leadership teams and working with colleagues and so on, and we do a lot of video calls and sharing my screen. I think it works fantastic on iPad. And we've had a lot of schools at the early part of COVID who adopted Teams specifically as a teaching tool, not only to be able to liaise and work with their students, but also from a feedback perspective. And again, one of the things that we're really passionate about is highlighting the feedback possibilities that can happen as well. So again, just to put that in people's minds, and this is just to highlight some of the main ones that we're seeing. Actually, I've not added Teams on there, but it should be. But there is an alternative from Apple's perspective. And actually, if we look specifically here at Word, Excel, PowerPoint, for example, is that Apple do have their own Pages, Numbers, and Keynote. And with all of Apple's iWork collection is you can export as a Word or an Excel and as a PowerPoint. And it's a reality is that Excel is by far a very powerful, or the most powerful spreadsheet tool on the market, and it has been for a long time. We're not changing that, but it does give people the ability to kind of mix and change things up. And again, I know you're going to demonstrate that a bit later on. Sorry. Have you got anything else to add on those apps there, Matt, or is it kind of a given?
I just think, kind of just building on what you said, I think when you put these apps on a device, you offer those students the choice. And so if we again sort of focus on the learning and teaching aspect, yes, as an educator, I might have that kind of years and years and years of Word and PowerPoint documents because I've collated them over time, and my students can still access those things. But actually, once it's on the device, from a student's point of view, they can play around with either. They could open a Word document and think, well, do you know what? Actually, there's some things that I want to do with that in Pages, so I can just open it up in Pages and carry on doing some work. And then if my teacher lecturer wants it in Word format, I can share it back to them in Word format. So it's all interchangeable. And I think that when we look at digital competence and digital literacy of students, that's ultimately what we want for them. We want them to be able to understand, well, what works well for me? How can I achieve this task? And when you put the stuff on the device, as long as I can access that stuff, I can then be creative with what I do with that stuff in a choice that works for me. We can talk about students that will create things in Keynote and then add elements from Pages and export it to PowerPoint, and their working flow isn't as rigid anymore as I have an app and that's what I sit in.
Yeah.
And I think when you're taking the power of the device, the ability to just quickly move between apps just enhances what the product is that you're going to create. It's no longer, are you restricted by what one app can do, because you can easily just jump between apps and add the bits in that you can't do within that app itself.
And I think that comes down to the split screen. I know you're going to demonstrate that, but as well, having two things open at the same time. And again, that's a massive, uplift. What I would say actually, specifically on, and I haven't added Teams here, but one of the things that we've seen is the roadmap from Microsoft within actually the updates in Teams over the last few months has been huge. I mean, their usage daily is tens and tens of millions. But what's been great is that the apps across all of the platforms have been updated regularly, and there's some real wins in there. But I think it's important to understand that Microsoft see that as a real benefit, because actually there are probably far more users of Office 365 than there are of specific devices, if you like. And so the importance of having apps working across all the platforms is really important, which is why we've seen a massive uplift, and Teams absolutely has been a real saver over the last few months. I guess the next few slides really about just kind of highlighting kind of the views, a little bit of things like Microsoft Word here, so you can see that it actually visibly from a student perspective is quite. We've seen this before. It looks very similar. It's a mobile view, obviously, on this one, but it looks like Word, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is the familiarity is there between the app, and what we'll show in the demo is, if you then want to do something additional with it that that Pages offers that maybe Word doesn't offer.
Yeah.
It's a couple of taps to then just move across. And that's that transitional thing that I think lots of schools sometimes worry about, is if we kind of suddenly move to an Apple model, we have to use all of Apple's apps, and we have to therefore teach our students how to start from scratch. Well, actually, no, you don't, because what you're doing is this interim, and ultimately giving students that choice in the end, which is something that we know is really, really important. That critical thinking element of the skills we want for the workplace is that you want students to be able to make informed decisions. And often I'll get the conversation of, we don't want them to just sort of live within one ecosystem, because you never know what they're going to work in the future. Are they going to go to an office where they need to use Office 365? Are they going to go somewhere where they need to Google? Are they going to go somewhere that's all Apple? And actually what we're saying here is, well, if you can do all of those things on the one device, which you can on an iPad, actually you are teaching them everything. The device itself is really just their access point.
I think it's a valid point. The skill sets thing you talk about is what we know is that, that, and I've said it so many times, but 65% of students in education today are likely to do a job that doesn't yet exist because of technology, and actually employers are looking for employees now who have the ability to have adaptability skills, and it's not always about having a specific skill set. And you're right, it's about students now. How do we, especially with the blended learning approach, how do we get students to show us that they've really learned a specific topic or anything else? And it's about them showing the journey and coming back to that endpoint. That leads then onto that Fernandez, Wams and Mead report that I've often talked about as well, which is learning through creativity and why that wins. And actually, if we can tap into the motor neurons of our students, they're likely to have a much bigger uplift in retention. So it's 14.5% versus the old model, that Victorian model, which is sort of 28%. And I think you're right, is people actually use the apps based on what they're looking to achieve. If we look at here at PowerPoint, again, visibly looks very much as we're used to seeing. I think I have to highlight actually in PowerPoint, there's a great tool around the design ideas, which is built through an AI tool. And so if somebody is building a slide deck, and they were doing it on a computer, PC-based computer, and they wanted to get a real jazzy kind of template, they can hit the design ideas button. The AI within PowerPoint will kind of look at that, pull in some really cool imagery. And actually that's available on the iPad. And my 11-year-old finds it hilarious that he can go and start, he's heavily into his gaming, but he'll build slide decks and stuff, and he'll hit that design button, and PowerPoint pulls in some amazing stuff. But again, the ability to create PowerPoint is there. We've also got OneNote. OneNote is seen as an absolute winning tool, from using class notebook as well, to just general note taking. I know you use it, I use it, and we use it as a business as well. And again, visibly looks very similar to what students are used to seeing. And then I guess that leads us on to the OneDrive piece, which I think is probably the key, right, to 365, because that's where a lot of your documentation is held. And for a lot of institutions, what we're looking for them to potentially consider is lifting or shifting or maybe creating new content, but there's server content that is on site. How do they then access that? So one of those methods is absolutely through putting everything into OneDrive and doing that, and you get that unlimited storage or a terabyte of storage for students. You need to ensure your license type is correct for the Office 365 suite. But there are other tools, and I actually haven't. This is going to be dropping on you because I haven't discussed it. But Folder has been around a long time. That is an AD integration tool, and it essentially bridges the gap between iPad and on-site storage. So you don't actually even have to move to 365. As in OneDrive, you can actually still access that content through your iPad. But that is the key, right? And that goes back to that ecosystem workflow, and the core element is having access to the data. And OneDrive is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and we'll show this in the demo as well. I think, on my personal device, I've got OneDrive, I've got Google Suite, I've got Google Drive, I've got Dropbox, I've got Box, I've got ultimate kind of file storage.
Yeah.
But actually within the device, I don't actually pay much attention to where any of it's actually stored, because it's all neatly kind of kept together within files. So
Yeah.
I know it's on the device, and
Yeah.
I can access it, and it will open in the app that needs to open in. And we'll demo that in a second, just to show that from your point of view, it's all there.
Yeah. And I think Files is one of those hidden apps. I think we talk about the camera app on the iPad being strong, but Files is fantastic, and it works a treat across all of the cloud solutions. The other one is Teams. We kind of mentioned it all morning so far, but Teams is fantastic. Works off SharePoint again, which is cloud based, but it's a really good tool, and it's been used heavily from a teaching and learning perspective, not only from kind of video conferencing tool, but also as a collaboration tool and all of that. So we've obviously got that as well. The other thing that we wanted to just talk about before we start moving into a kind of a demo is around the App Store, and this is quite an incredible number. But there's 170,000 apps for education specifically on the App Store. That are made by Apple, that are not made by Apple, that are made by third parties, developers, and everything else. But going back to your point that you mentioned earlier, which is why I wanted to raise this, is that we know about students wanting to show their workflow and being a bit more creative and everything else. Is the open in feature, which I know or share feature, which you're going to talk about, the share extension, means that you can integrate that very much so with Office 365 and the apps that you're using there. And there's, I don't know what the total number of apps is consumer wise, but it's huge. I've forgotten the number now, but 170,000 apps is pretty big.
And I think what that alludes to is what we've talked about before, that element of choice for the students, and the opportunity here for education to really transform. Because if the outcome of any learning that I want the students to do is to demonstrate their knowledge of X, Y, or Z, how they do that almost is irrelevant to the teacher, but to the student, it's hugely important, because that's the motivation to do my best. If you ask me personally to write an essay on something, I'm just not engaged. I'll do it because it needs to be done.
Yeah.
If you give me the opportunity to demonstrate my knowledge in a creative way, I'm engaged then, because I want to put more effort in, which actually means you're going to get better results from me. I'm not just doing it. I'm not just completing it for the sake of getting it completed. I'm doing it because actually I want to show my pride in it. Now, I'm one person. The next person might say, do you know what, I love to write an essay. And the next person might say, I'd love to draw a picture. I'd love to write a poem. I'd love to make a piece of music to demonstrate that. And actually, that's what we want to look at here is, yes, we need access. We need the opportunity to be able to communicate and collaborate. But we also need to give choice. We need definitely, and again, we've talked about this in terms of the Jobs of the Future report, we need creative individuals that can see opportunities to develop something and change it. We want students to ask the right questions, and we want them to come up with better answers. And that's not just for answering the school questions, but answering the world's problems as well.
Yeah. So true. So I guess the pressure's on you now. This is where it could all go horribly wrong, or it could be really great. So I guess from that perspective, I'm going to just essentially stop sharing the slide presentation. We're going to go much bigger, but if you could share your screen, and then what I'll do probably is we'll remove our cameras or let me just, maybe Matt, if we just turn our cameras off for the minute, just so that people's got the whole screen. And if we've got questions as we go along, please do let us know. So hopefully you can still hear us. I'm going to just move to the chat window as well. So I guess, Matt, if we go back to the myths that we kind of had earlier on, I use Outlook for my email, but iPad is Apple, not Microsoft.
So there's kind of two things there. One, obviously, Microsoft has an app, which is Outlook, which I can go into. I'm not going to open my emails now, because you never know if I'm going to get one which is like rude or sacking me or something terrible like that. But yes, Outlook exists as an app on my device, but also within the Mail app itself, I can add Outlook directly into it, so it can integrate directly into my Mail.
Actually, Matt, I'm going to ask you to do something you shouldn't be doing, but if you go into your settings and then go into add a mail account, I think it should allow you to add account. And actually, Microsoft Exchange is there, and also the Outlook.com is there as well. So again, really embedded into. I didn't realize AOL and Yahoo still existed, but you. But you can do that. Really importantly, what I would say actually about the Outlook app is in terms of the search features and the way that it manages the files and everything else, and any attachments is really fantastic. So absolutely worth doing that. Let's pick another one. So randomly, I've got 5 years worth of PowerPoint. I can't get them on my iPad. I can't use PowerPoint.
Okay, so we talked about this before, didn't we, in terms of like the move from having things stored on your device to going to the cloud. And I think people have seen that hugely in the last few months. If they've had to suddenly go to working from home and they're not in their office, I know that colleagues of mine working in university, that was one of the issues straight away, was actually I need access to the computer itself, because that's where a lot of my stuff is stored. So let's kind of bridge that by saying ultimately, and as you've mentioned, the move to the cloud is probably more efficient for us anyway. And certainly in this situation, if it was all in the cloud, which mine is, that move to remote teaching was fairly easy because I did have access to those things. So let's talk about the PowerPoint element. So I've got all of those things. I've got 5 years worth of resources stored on PowerPoint. So I want to have access to those things. So a couple of things that come obviously as standard. I do have access to OneDrive. So if I go into OneDrive on my device, anything that I've created work-wise is stored on my device here. So I can access all of those things. But the second thing is, and we mentioned this before, if I go to the Files app, which is this app just by here, then when I open that, I actually have access to all of my drives. So I have my iCloud drive, I have my OneDrive, even my Google Drive, as well as those other third-party ones that we talked about before. So if I go into my personal and go into Files, this is the same stuff that I just showed you in my OneDrive app is accessible here, but I can also see everything else as well. So in my documents, here are some files. These are just specific ones I've put in for the demo today. But here's a PowerPoint presentation that I wanted to be able to access. I can tap on that. It opens directly into PowerPoint. It knows it's PowerPoint, and it's going to open directly onto my device. And then the thing here is from here is I might actually want to do something different with this. So yes, I'm in PowerPoint at the moment. I have my options to insert different things and draw things. But actually what can be quite useful here, and we talked about this before in terms of the comparable apps. If I go into Keynote, I'm just going to start a new project. So I've just got a blank slide on my screen. And then actually, and this is another like really powerful thing, I can go into split screen. I can drag Keynote alongside, and now I've got PowerPoint working alongside Keynote. And actually, I might actually, from a creative point of view, want to do something a little bit different here. If I just take off those icons, the power of the device. So I'm not going to go into a whole maths lesson here, but the idea here is to count the cubes. Well, how about if I actually have the students drag those cubes across and drop them into a new location, so they can count them as they go. But also now I've got those things on the Keynote slide. I'm not going to go through the whole process, so I can count them across. And now I can be creative with this. So I can start to build. I can start to make new shapes.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm integrating kind of that choice from the student's point of view. And actually what happens here is it becomes a puzzle. So you can see, again, I'm taking teaching and learning in a different direction, because I'm thinking, well, I can't put that piece, here because it overlaps and it disappears. So how can I recreate this? And that's that element of creativity. And then what I'm also going to kind of layer onto that is, and I can't actually demonstrate it, but this icon here is a screen record. And at that point, I can screen record everything I'm doing and talk over the top. So now what I've added in is this whole process as well. I'm documenting my thought process. I'm documenting the creativity. And I'm working kind of seamlessly between those two apps, because ultimately I can have the teacher's information open on one page and I can do my creativity on the other side.
But Matt, now you've moved me into Keynote, and I can't save that as a PowerPoint.
Okay, so the simple process there is if I tap on the three dots at the top here,
Yeah.
you'll see that I have the option to export this, and PowerPoint is an option to export it.
Okay, so let's test this then.
So I'm going to export that. It's going to give me the share option, and we've mentioned this before. The share extension sheet is really fluid. If I'm working in OneNote, I could tap on OneNote. If
Yeah.
I'm working in Teams, I can tap on Teams. I can just simply then share that. I think I set one up before as a demo activity.
It's about to go to university.
And
I mean,
yeah.
you don't have to do it, but the point is you can.
There we go. So our class,
Yeah.
and then I can just send that. Okay, and that's the process. It's pretty seamless. It's a couple of taps at each point to go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing.
Yeah.
And now that's then going to live back within, and we've mentioned before, Teams.
Yeah.
So it's integrated directly to it. Here's my class, and then that file is going to show up in here, and there it is at the top.
Wowzers.
My naming conventions probably need to be updated slightly. Presentation 133 gives it away that I'm not great at naming my device.
What's your presentation 99? I'm only joking. Right, so an interesting one. USB sticks. I think the reality is what we want to really the first step of any technology journey, and especially around education, is really to consider moving to the cloud. The DfE have been banging on about that since 2015, and so but let's be honest, there are still those who use USB sticks for whatever reason, or maybe a child brings it in or whatever it is. How do we access it on the iPad? Now I know what you're going to do, because you're sharing your screen using a connector, so you can't plug it in, but you've built a little slide deck to show how it might work.
I did, yeah. So if I just go to that slide deck quickly, move it to full screen. So I just kind of wanted to demonstrate this. So this is what Files looks like as standard. When I plug in the USB via the connector, what you'll notice then on the left-hand side is that storage is now popped up underneath Google Drive.
Yeah.
And that's my external storage. I can then go into that exactly the same way as I showed you a second ago, going into OneDrive and all
so you
those
just
things.
clicked on it as if it was on a laptop, essentially, and you.
Yeah, it just shows up. It just shows up in the left-hand side. Pretty standard stuff.
Yeah.
If you're on any device, if you plug it in, it appears as an external storage, and then as soon as it's on the device, it's not loaded onto my iPad. It's not taking up any storage on the device, but I can do a range of things. Quick look, change the name of those things, and it's going to update that thing on my USB as well. So, simple way to kind of move around those things.
That's really fantastic. I thought there was another step. There's no other step.
No. I was going to show the whole opening of it and everything, but we've shown that already.
Okay.
It will open in PowerPoint. If I clicked on it, it would open in PowerPoint as long as PowerPoint is installed on my device. Or I could choose to open it in a different option as well.
Yeah. I guess some of the myths also is that we're a Microsoft school and we use Active Directory and everything else. I think it's fair to say that when institutions look at deploying iPads and the management of those devices, it can be done through federated Active Directory and Azure and so on, and through the MDM, and so that's really important to remember. We can't really demonstrate the touch typing bit, but what we can say is that certainly all iPads now have the ability to have a keyboard of some sort. So from the 7th gen, the standard I guess education device, that has the ability to have a keyboard. I know you use the Logitech Combo Touch on yours, and that's got trackpad as well.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we could just actually maybe, you talked about having the PowerPoint and Keynote bit, but I don't know whether we could just have 2 Word documents, maybe split screen as well, to show the power of that.
As in two documents from Word itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say, here comes the dissertation element. The other thing I would say as well with the touch typing is that ultimately is choice again, because I've seen my son recently, I say, text your friends if you want to go out to play for a little bit now that we've got that freedom. And then I hear him talking. I say, did you phone them instead? He goes, no, I just use Siri and I just speak my text message because I can't bother to type it. And so actually when we start to think about like accessibility for learners, touch typing is a skill, but it isn't the only skill. I've seen students type pretty quickly with 2 thumbs, like faster than I can type with 10 fingers. So again, it's choice, isn't it? Yes, it might be really quick for some people, but we also have to judge the younger generation by their own standards and not by our standards. We have learned a certain way. They have learned in a slightly different way to us. And actually for them, it might be quicker to do it in a different way. And so choice through, is it, I'm going to type with my voice? Am I going to type with my thumbs? Am I going to use the physical keyboard? Or am I going to use the virtual keyboard? So as long as at the end of the day, it works for them and it doesn't hamper them, I think that's the key thing. If you'd asked me to touch type anything 10 years ago, you'd get it in about 5 years time. And I'm talking just typing my name because I'm that slow.
Yeah. And I think it's actually, not actually a discredit to you. What I would argue is that obviously you talked about sketchnoting there, but actually the use of digital linking is becoming more and more useful. And go back to that retention knowledge and the way that learners write. And actually, it's fair to say that there are those students who love to type. There are also those students who prefer to or don't like writing, but actually have great ideas. And my son is a prime example of this. Is if you ask him to write a story, and during COVID, he had a couple of projects where he was given images that he had to write a story and kind of do that creative writing. When he was talking about it, it was amazing. When you said, can you write that down? He'd only write about 2 lines. And for those primary school teachers that are on here, you'll probably totally understand that. But actually, you're right. He was able to, and I guess, is it moving away from the touch typing element or the typing element? The fact is, what we want to know is they understand something and that they've got the creativity and everything else. So him being able to use Siri to type into Word was fantastically powerful, because actually the teacher, when he was handing the work in, was able to see that he did grasp the task and he did actually show what he knew. I don't know if you're going to be able to demo it. Are you going to be able to? Can you do a Siri demo on a document or not?
I can. Yep. What I'll probably do is actually. So that was, you were asking before about this sort of 2
split screen.
Split screen of 2 Word documents at the same time. Let's say that actually my dissertation, there was something in my dissertation. My dissertation was, if I kind of scroll through, was on sketchnoting, and actually within that there were pictures, etc. So I'll be honest, I could have done it in Word. I did do it in Pages and then exported it to Word. So if I stick it back into Pages, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, there are times when I might want to do Siri. Now, this has all been handed in, so I can change this. So if I just highlight my keyboard, oops, let's come back out and go back in a sec. You'll notice that to the left of the space bar, I have the microphone, so I can just type whilst talking. And it's pretty quick and just instant going in. But the other thing as well in here was I'm kind of a creative learner. I like to do things that aren't just text. This for me would be very difficult to read because it's just lots and lots of writing. And I know that's technically what reading is. But some of the other things that I would do now, and something that Pages kind of maybe just takes something up a little bit, is the ability, and this is a new update, to embed video directly into. And I know you can add URLs in, but actually with this one, I recently did a presentation on sketchnoting. So I'm just going to go through the process quickly and just quickly grab the video link just to show the process. In fact, if I just take this one for now, even though it isn't the actual video, and just show you what this looks like. So within just a couple of taps, I can insert the video. But what this does nicely is it actually inserts it as the video. So it's not just URL saying click, and actually from this point of view, it will play within, so it kind of hosts it within the application itself. So from students' point of view, if they want to be really creative with their work, they can suddenly enhance something. And yes, they could draft it in Word, take it to Pages, do something else in Pages, export it back as a PDF. there's so many different avenues to use. And that's what we want our students to do, is how can I solve the problem?
Just highlight that again, Matt. So the 3 dots, just to show that again.
So if I want to add in a web clip.
No, sorry, just to export it.
Oh, to export it, right? So I just tap on the 3 dots, export,
and then you
and a range of things to export it as.
And actually, there's some other great ones there as well, EPUBs and all those sorts of things, but PDFs. So I think you know, it works really, really well. I'm conscious of time, Matt. So I'm going to ask you to essentially. I'll see if I can hijack your screen. Actually, I'm going to start my presentation again, and we're going to. I guess ask you to come back on with video. So thank you very much for that demo. I think today was really about just talking about, you know, how we can overcome some of these things. We are actually in the process of working behind the scenes on something very specific to Office 365 and iPad, and that will be something that will be available to customers much later on. And if there are any customers that are thinking of going down the route of iPads, and they use 365 or they use Microsoft Office, even if it's not 365, but want to go down that road, we're there to support that. And absolutely, we know that that sometimes it's about looking at the journey, the longer term journey, and planning so that that can happen. So Matt, I guess we'll ask just out loud if there are any questions in the chat that we may be able to answer. We may not always be able to do a live demo, but we can certainly answer. If there are questions, please ask them now. We've got a slight time delay, so we'll just wait a few seconds. And Matt, again, you know, huge thank you for you today for taking the time to be with us and doing some of that. I know that you're a hugely busy man. Any last words of wisdom?
No, I just think it's just that, you know, that intention that we wanted to get across today, that, you know, it's all possible, and we just kind of wanted to highlight that don't let the back end system dictate the tools that you use in the classroom, because ultimately that might unlock huge learning potential for individuals, and I guess that's my passion. Like you said, you joke about the badge collecting element. What I try to do is be informed about what is available and what is out there, so that I come across, I suppose, more authentic and credible. Because yes, I'm not saying this is good because, you know, I'm a fanboy of any one of them. I'm saying it's good because actually I've worked with it and I've seen the impact it's had. And at most times it's a mixture of all of those things, you know, because you can work, as we've tried to demonstrate today, really interchangeably between them. But sometimes the device actually offers you something that another device just doesn't allow you to do.
And it's really valid. And actually, one of the other questions actually that we probably didn't touch on, that we often get talked about, that gets talked about, is from a teacher perspective. You always have to have a desktop computer plugged into this big screen at the front. And actually, there are ways that that can be the experience can be bettered, and that is the use of an iPad as a whiteboard and a giant screen at the front, and you can then continue using your PowerPoint, you know, your words, and streaming that. And it moves away from that traditional model, which actually long term means some sustainable financial savings, which is really key, and operational efficiencies, which we see are also hot topics at the moment. So
and
it
with
looks
Apple
like
Classroom, I'd say, Tom, every student, you know, if all the students had access to the iPad with Apple Classroom, everybody's got that interactive whiteboard at the front of the screen. So you know, we've learned a lot in the last few months, and I don't know how many times I've said this, but the expert doesn't need to be in the room anymore, and we've proved that the last few months.
Are you saying teachers don't need to be there anymore? Is that what you're saying?
No. But the role of the teacher can hugely be different, and the teacher skill set. The reason you got into teaching was probably not because you just wanted to tell everybody what you know. It's because you wanted to help other people. And I think what we've seen now is you're almost unleashed to do that, because the content can be accessed in various different ways. But your role as a teacher is absolutely critical. And I think when I talk, and not to go too far off track here, when I talk to my son about what he's missed about school, he doesn't say the learning. He says he misses the teacher and the way the teacher inspires him. And that is absolutely 100% critical. So when you're free to not stand at the front anymore, you kind of empower yourself again as the teacher to move around and support those learners.
And I would absolutely agree that from our perspective is absolutely, teachers will never not be needed. School buildings will always be required. The way that we use those is going to be different. And I guess more than ever, the only positive that's come out of the COVID scenario is we've got an opportunity to change the way that we do things in that education space. So with that, we've had a few people drop out. So goodbye to those if you've already gone. Thank you for those who are still here, and we wish you a fantastic rest of the day. And if there are any areas or conversations you'd love to follow up, please let us know. And at that point, we will say goodbye. So Matt, I'll see you later because we're doing another webinar.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn my video off. Archie do the same. I'm also going to start playing the outro video, and we're going to wish you a good